Nobody walked into the most famous tennis tournament on earth expecting a 20-year-old from Quezon City to hijack the entire storyline, and yet somehow that is precisely what happened. Because within days the cameras at the All England club stopped chasing the usual suspects and started chasing flags instead, chasing chance, chasing a wave of noise nobody on the organizing committee had bothered to plan for. And that alone should tell you something strange and wonderful was unfolding on those pristine lawns. So let's ask the obvious question. How does a player who has never lifted a Grand Slam trophy become the most talked about person at Wimbledon before her first match even finishes? And the answer, once you dig into it, tells you far more about where tennis is headed than it does about any single scoreline. Because while the reigning world number one was fielding another round of exhausted questions about burnout and pressure and whether she could ever recapture her rhythm. After a brutal stretch of the season, a completely different athlete was quietly arriving in London with something heavier than a ranking beside her name. She was carrying the hopes of an entire nation on her shoulders, and before she had even struck a competitive ball, the atmosphere trailing behind her felt like nothing the grounds had experienced in years. This wasn't just about a dangerous floater capable of upsetting bigger names. This was about a young woman who had somehow become the face of a movement that had been waiting patiently in the wings for decades. Picture two press conferences happening under the same roof that week. One belonged to the most dominant player alive, a proven champion with the trophies to prove it, and the other belonged to a rising star making history simply by walking in with a seed next to her name. And if you had asked any casual sports fan which room would generate more online buzz, the safe answer should have been obvious. Except it wasn't. Because her press conference lit up timelines in a way that had nothing to do with rankings and everything to do with story. And if there is one lesson modern sports fandom keeps hammering home again and again, it is that popularity does not always follow the seeding sheet. Sometimes it follows a narrative, and few narratives in recent tennis memory have caught fire as quickly or as organically as this one. But here's the part that matters most. None of this happened by accident or overnight. If you only discovered her because of a viral clip or a trending hashtag, it might look like some sudden explosion out of nowhere, but anyone who had actually been paying attention for years already knew the signs: the junior success, the early flashes of brilliance on tour, the slow and deliberate climb that convinced insiders something historic was quietly being built. And by the time the grass court major rolled around, the believers no longer needed to convince anybody of anything. The results were doing the convincing for them, because only days before setting foot in London she had already claimed the biggest grass court title of her career in Birmingham. And if you don't follow the sport closely, understand that winning on grass is one of the cruelest challenges in the entire game. It demands split-second reactions, near-perfect footwork, and a stubborn kind of self-belief that most players take years to develop. Most young athletes need seasons just to feel comfortable on the surface, let alone lift a trophy on it, and yet she handled that entire week with a composure that belied her age, grinding through brutal matches before walking away a champion. And rewind slightly further, and the road into that title looks even more impressive. Because at an event in Berlin right before Birmingham, she announced herself as a legitimate threat by taking down one of the most feared servers in the women's game before eventually bowing out in the semi-final. And let's be honest about what that win actually represents. Beating a player who can end points in a single swing, on grass of all surfaces, is not something you chalk up to a lucky afternoon. That kind of result demands real tactical discipline and fearless shot selection, and the nerve to stay locked in against someone capable of ending a rally before it even begins. And those results completely reshaped the conversation around her, because they made her the first player from her country in history to walk into a major as a seeded competitor, and that milestone stretches far beyond one individual career. Tennis, for the better part of a century, has belonged to a small handful of nations with deep coaching pipelines and generations of champions passing knowledge down the line. And her home country, despite a massive population and a genuinely passionate sporting culture, had simply never produced someone who reached this level. And now, almost overnight, that long wait was over. Every practice session she completed on those grounds felt like another page being written into her nation's sporting history. Meanwhile, just a short walk away, the tournament's top seed was dealing with an entirely different kind of media storm, because the world number one remained, without argument, one of the most fearsome competitors in the sport. Yet her build-up to the tournament had almost nothing to do with forehands or serve speed, and everything to do with headlines about fatigue and recovery following a difficult stretch earlier in the season. Reporters weren't asking about her backhand. They were asking whether she could reclaim her rhythm while